This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area. Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
Quiet on the set. Soon we will all be more informed.
We appreciate learning more of our region's news and public affairs. Cameras rolling.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. As we near the season for closely watching tropical weather maps, there are so many concerns that one parish president even wants to change the traffic flow procedures. In Baton Rouge, congressional district maps have created a storm of their own as lawmakers face a mandate to carve out a new district. There will also be a new city on the state's maps. We will know it to be called St. George. And a new mayor and council will be figuring out the other details about that. We'll look at these stories tonight, plus a struggle in the legislature about public disclosure laws and major new discoveries in the clergy's sex abuse investigations. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Ramon Vargas, staff editor and reporter, The Guardian, LeBron Joseph, news anchor and reporter, WGNO TV, Channel 26, and Kevin McGill, reporter, The Associated Press. And we stay with Kevin. And what's going on right now with our congressional map? What do we have? Do we have one?
We are, I guess we're less than 6 months away from fall elections, and we don't have a congressional map right now for all intents and purposes. There was one passed in January that created a new majority black district for Louisiana, the second one in the state. But a panel of federal judges sitting in the Western District voted 2-1 against that map. They said it can't be used, and they ordered this. Essentially, they've ordered the state to come up with a new one if they can in time for the next election. There's a big doubt that they can. The legislators are saying, even though they're in session right now, there's really no mechanism for doing that. It's too late to call a special session, and so it's been appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay. And we really expect that by next week, we don't know what they're going to do, but if they fit with precedent, they will keep the January map in place for the fall election, pending more appeals. And then in future elections, we'll have to wait and see what happens with it.
Now, the deadline the legislature was given to redraw another map is when? When would they have to have one drawn, if they would do it?
There's a couple of different deadlines to talk about there, but let's go back a couple of years. There's a lot of moving parts in multiple courts on this story. The legislature redrew maps in 2022 to account for population shifts. They pretty much had the status quo, 5 mostly white districts, 1 mostly black district. Voting rights advocates said, the state population is now about 1/3 black, but we only have a 1/6 black House delegation. Mm-hmm. That should be addressed. Ultimately, a federal judge and a federal appeals court said it probably violates the Voting Rights Act, and they gave the state a deadline, basically at the end of January, to do a new map. Governor Landry was the new governor at that point. He had defended the old maps as Attorney General, but he said it's time for us to do it rather than the courts. Then they passed the map that has that new majority black district that starts up in Caddo Parish around Shreveport, stretches across the state, as you said, like a seat belt a little earlier, reaches down into Lafayette and through Alexandria into Lafayette and Baton Rouge to link pockets of black population. That doesn't look like any of the maps that were suggested during the litigation earlier, which were more compact, kind of hugged. I think most of them kind of hugged the eastern side of the state, making it look more like the other districts. But this one was one favored by the governor. The governor has not addressed this explicitly, but there's people that said, well, and everyone wants to save the seats of the House Speaker and the majority leader, two of the most powerful people in Congress, so Louisiana wants to keep them. Julia Letlow, a newer congresswoman from Northeast Louisiana, she's on the Appropriations Committee. They wanted to save her seat. And there's some talk that Governor Landry didn't particularly care to save the seat of Garrett Graves, who had supported one of his GOP opponents in the last election. So the argument is, was this a racial gerrymander that is unconstitutional, as the three-judge panel in the Western District said, or is it a map drawn, although oddly, with purely political considerations? And that's a key element. Right now, none of that might get settled because it's just too late. The Secretary of State's office has been pretty consistent in saying they need a map in place by May 15th, which is Wednesday. The panel that said, no, you got to come up with a new map, they had cited some testimony, and I don't remember if it was in a court hearing or a legislative hearing, that said they could go to the end of the month and still get the maps in place. But the state notes that not only do they have to do the new maps for the congressional race, the Supreme Court was just reapportioned, and the Secretary of State's office has to get that all ready, and they really need to know what they're going to do by Wednesday. And so we would expect that the Supreme Court will put the ruling that on hold that blocked this, and the January map will be used.
Okay, could the other map that was changed, to the one with the two
status,
black districts, could that be used?
The one that has two black districts that was passed in January is the one we think.
The one that didn't. The one that
didn't from 2022. The state did dangle that as a possibility in their filing today, but as one of my colleagues in Washington said, it would be kind of astounding if the Supreme Court, after Judge Shelley Dick in Baton Rouge said it probably violates the Voting Rights Act, and the Fifth Circuit allowed that to go on, and they told the legislature to draw new maps, and then the Supreme Court didn't reverse them on that. It would be extremely surprising to see them put that status quo map back into place. We'll know next week, probably.
Very confusing, and of course Garrett Graves says he's running anyway, but he does have an opponent.
Yes,
Cleo
he does.
Fields.
And Cleo Fields, who was a part of a black district in the 90s. He's obviously a black Democrat, ran for governor in the 90s. A similar district was thrown out in the 90s, and he lost his seat in Congress, but he's going to run again, he says.
Okay, all righty, Kevin. We'll see where it goes. It's kind of head spinning, absolutely. And talking about head spinning, Ramon, let's go on over to you, because we keep hearing new information with the clergy sex scandal, particularly as it applies to Lawrence Hecker. So what's the latest that you have on that?
So I was able to access, alongside David Hammer at WWL-TV, an 8.5-hour deposition that Lawrence Hecker gave in 2020. Of course, Hecker is facing a pending child rape and kidnapping case. We know, we know that he confessed to molesting several children. This confession came in 1999 to superiors, and it dated back. It was acts dating back decades. The deposition really kind of let him, in his own words, explain the extent to which the church kind of coddled him and protected him from not only criminal exposure but also media exposure. And so among the things that he describes is, among the things that came out in the deposition was the church had his confession in hand when it decided to go ahead and promote him to Monsignor, which is and he describes in great detail the way that that's an honor that's bestowed upon the Pope, by the Pope. And they had the information, went ahead with it.
And was he a Monsignor in our archdiocese?
He remains one to this day.
To this day.
Yeah. And he, he also received, later on, there was a recommendation that the archdiocese received to laicize him, right, which is not this suspend from ministry where they just tell him that they can't say mass in public, but basically to laicize him and to oust him from the clergy altogether. The church ignored that recommendation. That set the stage for him to collect benefits, tens of thousands of dollars of benefits, housing assistance, insurance, name it, and including limousine rides to a facility that, that diagnosed him as a pedophile, right? And then paid massages that he received as treatment as part of that diagnosis. It's all forms, right? And really, the key thing that set the stage for that was the decision to not follow the recommendation to laicize him. And so Another thing that stood out, he was 117 different times during the deposition. He pleaded the Fifth Amendment, right?
And how long was the
117
deposition?
times, 8.5 hours, every 4 minutes. That is a staggering number, and I think strongly indicates his fear that he would one day be criminally charged, which he was in September 2023. And if there's one last thing I can say, one thing that jumps out to me, and now he's awaiting trial. And there is a debate about whether he is mentally competent to stand trial. A team of psychiatrists has ruled that he has short-term memory loss that prevents him from being able to do that. At the time, he was asked directly if he had short-term memory loss at the time of the deposition, and he said no. And so,
this deposition, remind us one more time. When was this deposition?
In 2020, and so that's where the way that he was kind of handled. That's what 4 years kind of gets you, right? Where like if maybe this comes forward at any other point, it coming forward until 2023 sets the stage where now everyone's kind of waiting to see, does he even stand trial because of his enfeebled age? He's 92. There's a lot of debate about how much he's putting on that he's enfeebled and how much he's actually physically up to standing to and mentally up to standing a trial.
So the 2020's deposition, were the officials, church officials of the archdiocese, aware of what he was saying in that?
I mean, there was an attorney. I mean, there was an attorney for the archdiocese in the deposition. It came as part of a lawsuit that was filed after the first time they disclosed Hecker being credibly accused of child molestation in 2018. It triggers a lawsuit that set the stage for that deposition.
Okay.
Well, it seems like a key undercurrent to all this is the question of what the bishops knew.
Right.
Yeah, I think it makes it pretty clear that the last four, Hannon, Schulte, Hughes, Amon, knew and had plenty of reason to know about what his past was.
So all of this that was disclosed in this deposition, did that prompt the state police then to go in and do what they've done?
So, I mean, the investigation into, there was a separate complaint that he has asked about in the deposition. That's the one that led to the criminal charges. It wasn't the plaintiff's case. It was another case that led to the criminal charges. And in the investigation that produced the criminal charges then kind of like helps lead to this broader inquiry into, and it's the one that we discussed last week, where the state police obtained a warrant to basically get all of everything that the archdiocese has in terms of clergy abuse, and makes it clear that the church is a target of a child sex trafficking investigation.
And how many victims are we talking about here?
It's for Hecker alone. I mean, during the deposition,
that's what I mean. For Hecker,
he becomes overwhelmed himself at the number of accusations that he's facing. He's like, I can't. And they ask him, like, you can't even remember how many kids you've abused, right? And he pleaded the fifth to that. But as you sit there and you spend hours trying to go over it, I don't think it's even clear to him how many times he's been accused, and it's impossible to decipher how many times he's been accused. What I can say is that it spans, right, everyone, the U.S. clergy abuse crisis, the reckoning, the U.S.'s reckoning with clergy abuse began with Gilbert Goche in the 1980s. That prompted accusations. It continued through the 2002. There was a case in 1996. Robert Melanson was convicted of raping an altar boy. That brought more allegations against Hecker. 2002 in Boston, the Spotlight scandal. That brings out more allegations against Hecker. And then, if you remember, the decision to release the credibly accused list in 2018 was this bombshell Pennsylvania grand jury report that established that there were more cases of clergy abuse in Pennsylvania that they had ever realized. That prompts the archdiocese to release a list of credibly accused clergy. Hecker's on it. That prompts more people. So it spans his history of allegations spans the entire U.S. Clergy abuse crisis, and the deposition makes it as clear as ever.
Wow. All right, Ramon, really just amazing reporting there, and I know there'll be more from you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, LeBron, over to you. And that's something I want to talk about at all.
None of us.
I mean, here we are, on the doorstep of hurricane season.
Yes.
And we heard something interesting from Jefferson Parish president this week.
Yes, we're wrapping up National Hurricane Preparedness Week. A bunch of different folks around the country are doing their part in different government entities, doing their annual preparedness pressers, if you will. Last week, Jefferson Parish had theirs. I think it was Friday of last week, Thursday or Friday of last week. What got a lot of folks' attention is the parish president, Chang, making the statement that for all intents and purposes, contraflow, the ability that we use to get the masses of us out of, harm's way in the lower parishes, that would probably not be able to happen. And the point she was making is the rapid intensification of the storms now is, in the past couple of years, has exceeded well beyond what anyone ever thought. The intensification in the past was 35 miles per hour per 24-hour period. When you had a storm like Otis a year ago that intensified over 90 miles an hour or doubled in size in 24 hours. It is that kind of growth and strength that these hurricanes have produced. The parish president said that because contraflow requires 72 hours to institute, and an awful lot of manpower and resources from just about every one of these entities in terms of governments working together, driven by the state, mind you, that it is almost impossible to see a world or see a time where that could be done as strong as the storms are. And so it begs the question of, what do we do to get ourselves out of here? What do we do to get our people out? And what she suggested more than anything, and I think this was the underscore for a message to everyone, is that on a personal level, we really have to think a bit faster, move a bit faster, especially if we have vulnerable family members, that the decision to wait until the state makes that decision, or wait until Jefferson Parish government or Orleans or whatever, if you know that there is a vulnerable person in your house, that if we're anywhere near that cone, your mindset should be, let's get on the road, or let's get grandma out of here, or whatever it is we have to do.
And, it's just not an easy decision to make, to evacuate.
No.
If you have, like you say, a needy family member, it's hard to transport.
It's also expensive.
If you have a lot of kids, a lot of animals, it's expensive. It's tough.
Expensive, and the false thing we get is, if in fact we leave and we spend a couple $1,000 for 3 or 4 days away from the house, and then the thing doesn't come this way, we get that false sense of, we left last year, we're going to stay, and we can't afford to be that laxed about it.
I think a lot of people from Katrina will remember that they left home thinking they'd be away 3 or 4 days.
Yes.
And it was 2 months or 3 months.
That is exactly right.
It was a long time.
And then we realized during Ida that how fast they could intensify, and there was really not a lot of time to call an evacuation by the time it became as dangerous as it was. And it just kind of, again, and Katrina happened. We started seeing that it was going to be a dangerous storm on a Friday night. A lot of people weren't really paying attention, which kind of drives home the idea that we've all got.
There was a Saints preseason game that night.
It was. It was.
LeBron, if we get another storm just like Katrina, but with all of the work, the infrastructure improvement that's been done, are we better off now?
Well, we certainly can't. We can't make that call against Mother Nature, boy. I tell you, we've had
something. Things that they've done.
We've had some of the things that we've done: the levee systems, the gates. The
surge barrier.
The surge barriers, the super wall down in across Bayou Bienvenue and all that, the stuff on the West Bank, the big gates, the big pumps. I'd like to think, and I'm no expert here, that we're in better shape. Certainly during Ida, they held up much better than ever before. But, I don't think we can ever make that call to say, hey, we can withstand a 5 or we can withstand a 4 or whatever.
I don't think anybody's called that.
Yeah,
we
Mark,
can necessarily withstand a 5.
Who's often on the show here, Schlefstein, I asked him, what's the worst case scenario? He said, we've never had a storm come up the Mississippi River. And if that ever happens, we just don't know that a storm comes up the mouth of the Mississippi River and breaks the levees, the river levees. That is the one.
Heaven forbid.
Yeah, heaven forbid. And so, are we better off? I hope so.
I've certainly heard that we are better off, but still, we've not really been tested yet, and nobody is saying that this level of protection that we have could really protect us against one of these major storms, like a 5 or above.
Billions
hitting us in a certain way.
Yeah. I don't think any other American city has had the infrastructure rebuilt, or the region, if you will. Even yesterday, they opened the gates over in Belle Chase, testing the stuff over there again, as we do every hurricane season. We certainly are better positioned than we've ever been.
but we're still in the position of being socked by a heavy storm. So
what
anyway,
I will say, that presser that President Cynthia Lee Shang did last week, and just as you'll see in all of the parishes as they do them, there were tons of officials speaking. And they spoke about just about every element. One of the things that she has always been really hitting hard about the last couple of years, we've even spoken to her on a couple of occasions about, is the work on our roofs, believe it or not, of reinforcing our roofs for a couple of reasons. One, that it protects our homes better, but two, that is one way that a number of officials see that the insurance issue gets a bit more resolved. That, for insurance companies, they understand because the quality of what our build is now.
Okay, prepare.
Prepare.
Basically what we have
That's
to
all
do.
it is.
All right, LeBron, thanks. E, over to you. We have a new city in the state of Louisiana.
The newborn city, or at least there's a city in the incubator, okay, that I guess they'll go through. This has been on for years. It's going to be called St. George. It's in East Baton Rouge Parish. It's east of the city of Baton Rouge. East Baton Rouge is different from all the other parishes in that there's this parish, and then it has cities in it. There's one city that's dominant, which of course is Baton Rouge. And the way they structured their government, it's a city-parish government. There is no mayor of Baton Rouge. There's a mayor-president of East Baton Rouge Parish. And so the East Baton Rouge government also runs Baton Rouge, even though there are the same functions that are traditional parish functions and some that are that traditional city. It's different from New Orleans in that New Orleans, the parish and the city are the same thing. And so way back when somebody thought, well, let's just make one government, the city government of New Orleans is the government of Orleans Parish. So that's one thing. What Baton Rouge has is a little bit different. It's if you're the mayor president, some of your stuff you do has to do with the parish and some with the city. Anyway, so that's part of the debate. So this would be a city another city within East Baton Rouge Parish, which has other cities. But if you look at the cities 4 through 7 in Louisiana, St. George would be bigger than Kenner, and Baton Rouge is 140,000 people. Baton Rouge is not on this list though because it's not incorporated, and so it's technically not a city, right? But anyway, it would be a substantial piece of property in the parish. There'll probably be some legal challenges, but there've been a lot all the way. I think it's past the biggest hurdles. But once everything is approved, the next thing to do is establish a government, and the enabling legislation is going to allow the governor to appoint the first mayor and the first council, which is the kind of stuff Jeff Landry loves. I mean, he's probably sitting in his office right now thinking who the mayor and the council is going to be. But at some point, the city of St. George will, I think, evolve and be part of the language. It's majority white and fairly affluent.
Okay, and it's a situation that's gone back and forth, but now it seems like
it
the
seems
city
like
of
it's going
St.
more
George
forth
is a
than
go.
back now. Yeah.
Okay. All righty. Thanks a lot. Okay, wrap it up with you, Kevin. And what's going on with the public records law?
A lot of attacks on it at the legislature this year, and the most prominent one, at least early on, was a bill by Senator Heather Cloud that, as the Public Affairs Research Council explained, it would have basically shielded all records across state and local government that involved deliberations of public employees. And that so-called deliberative exemption could be read very broadly. There are a lot of people who think it would just shut off almost all public records. That bill's been parked for a while, and I don't know if it's going anywhere, but there's another bill by Senator Jay Morris. I believe he's from up in the Monroe area. It's a work in progress right now, but it would have elements of Cloud's bill, but it would basically limit those exemptions to the governor's office. It would still be a very broad exemption. They use the word, again, deliberative process, but again, what does that mean? How broadly would that be interpreted? Again, there are fears that it would shield massive numbers of public records in the governor's office from public view. And so this might be a good test of how strong the governor is these days, and he's getting a lot of what he wants. I think that's going to be, it's a Senate bill, so it's still got a ways to go, but it'll be debated in the Senate as early as next week, and we've got a June 3rd deadline for adjournment.
For what's the reasoning for this? Why?
That's something that pops up on and off. Again, you take, for example, PAR, which was created in 1950, with part of it being to push for more open records. Louisiana has had what is widely regarded as a great open records law for decades now. But politicians, either for their own personal political reasons or just because they think it's better to have deliberations in private and opinions expressed in private in order to come up with ideas, they sometimes go after parts of the law. I had forgotten about this. We were talking before we went on the air tonight about Bobby Jindal had actually done something very similar to what Jay Morris wants to do for Governor Landry at this point, and it did go into effect for a while. And again, I was looking back at a history of it online, and the critics were saying, well, they used that deliberative process language again, but it ended up shutting down a lot of access to just about anything in the executive branch. So there's fears that that'll happen again. And whether there's the votes to pass it and get it through, we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, we will. Okay, thanks a lot, Kevin. And time for other stories. Hey.
Yeah. Last weekend, we saw the best example ever of missing a day at the Jazz Fest. On Saturday was the Kentucky Derby, and the winning jockey, Brian Hernandez, was from Lafayette. Horse won by the nose at the very end, but he won from Lafayette. The day before, there was a race called the Kentucky Oaks, which is the second biggest race in Louisville. Hernandez won that, too, on a different horse. And so on 2 days, he won the two biggest races in Kentucky. Sunday morning, he and his wife had planned to take a 6 o'clock flight to New Orleans for Jazz Fest. With all the uproar, they just couldn't make it. Can't go, won the Kentucky Derby, so he had to miss the Jazz Fest. So if you notice, too fewer people at the Jazz Fest last Sunday. That was why.
Right. Okay, thanks. Ramon.
Just right before we got on air, the Louisiana State Supreme Court struck down voted to rehear a decision in March that struck down the look-back window law, which opened a temporary period in which people could file lawsuits for damages over sexual molestation from decades ago, no matter how long ago. That had greatly benefited the Church of New Orleans, but so it's all the details are online.
All right, great, Ramon. LeBron.
Happy early Mother's Day, Marcy.
Well, thank you.
Mother's Day. Interestingly, one of the Social Aid and Pleasure Clubs has done a Mother's Day second line here, the original Big Seven, for decades. And about 10 years or so ago, a horrible tragedy. Several people shot. It was a terrible Mother's Day deal. Since that time, that group has made a push to still do this thing, and it has been very, very successful with a message of nonviolence. And also, hey, you're out and about this Sunday, you might see them in the streets.
So go celebrate the mom.
Go celebrate mom.
All right, real quick.
5 years to the day since motorist Ronald Green died in state police custody in North Louisiana, and I would recommend people take a look back on it by my colleague Jim Mustian on apnews.com.
Okay, very good. Thanks, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
Public television is our passion. With so much content that WYES broadcasts and presents online, we are quite entertained and highly informed.
Please join us in supporting WYES.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.